So, welcome to today's interview with Dame Stephanie Steve Shirley, a trailblazer in venture philanthropy. Her story is fascinating. Arriving in England as an unaccompanied child refugee in World War II, she founded a pioneering software company in 1962 that focused on employing women, particularly those in need of flexible work arrangements. The company grew to employ 8,500 people and was valued at nearly $3 billion. Driven by the generosity she received as a child, Dame Stephanie chose to give away her wealth, dedicating her life to philanthropy. Now in her later years, she continues to make every day count, and recently shared her insights in the foreword for our recent ANDA report, Rewards and Resilience, adding many wise words. Today, we'll talk about how things have changed and what still needs to be done for women in technology. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm personally very excited, but I know everyone who is going to watch this will be interested in hearing your story as well. I'd love to start just talking a little bit about career highlights. So what are some of the biggest moments in your career that have helped make a difference for women in tech?
Lauren, there have been so many instances where I've had a wonderful occasions to contribute to women in tech. But the one that sticks in my mind really is when I was elected the first woman president of the British Computer Society. That's a chartered body and very, very learned. It was quite an opportunity to make a difference in the sector and have a very high visibility. And something similar happened a few years later when I was the first woman master of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. And that was not only the first woman master in the company, but only the second woman master in the City of London, if you exclude the royals. So I've had a sort of high profile existence, and the highlights, mainly I write about them in my memoir, Let It Go. But I tend to think that my achievements are more the day-to-day, making it happen, leading the team, rather than anything too exotic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely felt the same when I've been surrounded by female role models, where sometimes it's just those day-to-day moments that make that real impact on your life and your career and how you view opportunity. And obviously, we talk a bit in the report around some of the challenges, but some of the progress. I'm really interested to know, sort of in the last 10 years, what progress for women in tech leadership roles makes you the happiest to see?
Well, the figure that stuck in my mind was that between 8 and 9% of women list their role as Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer, IT Manager, leader of the team. So they're leadership roles, because although the statistics aren't all that marvelous, women are achieving now in the day-to-day activities of any computer department. But it's the leadership role that's something new and is making a difference.
Completely agree. And I think, even in my time in technology, I've seen that shift as well, and seeing more people coming in, and it very much warms my heart. Specifically on programs, what programs or initiatives do you think have made the biggest difference in getting women into technology?
Well, I've thought about this question quite a lot, because there are so many real solid attempts to get more women into technology, and they haven't made a lot of difference. The ones that have, or three that have, all come from Durham University, where there's a Professor Sue Black there who's driven it all. And she started BCS, British Computer Society Women, for example, the Tech Up Women, which I don't know anything at all about, and Tech Mums, which is very relevant. And so Durham has really made a significant difference, and just shows what can be done when there is proper focus.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's been, I've been part of a lot of initiatives over the course of my career, and obviously you've started a lot, but it's great to see all of them come out and keep growing, and so important to what we do. So obviously we can't talk about the smooth without the rough a little bit. So wanted to touch still on current barriers. So you'll have seen from the report that even with all the progress, what do you think are the biggest obstacles still stopping women from reaching those top positions in tech?
Lauren, I sometimes despair. I mean, I have been working in women's empowerment for 50 years, and there's still so much to do. The figure that really struck me as awful was that only 8% of women in tech believe that they get equal pay for equal work. And I think that's horrific. We kid ourselves that in this country we have had equal pay for equal work for a long time, and it's a question of the gender pay gap. But this is far from the truth. We still have a long way to go on these most basic things: equal pay for equal work.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a harrowing statistic that even we're not making progress there. I think I'm curious to understand how you see that gender discrimination in technology has changed since you started. And then aligned with that, we've touched a bit on the gender pay gap. What other issues are women facing today?
When I was struggling and set up my company in 1962, there were legal barriers to stop women doing certain things in the financial services sector. We couldn't work on the stock exchange. We couldn't drive a bus. We couldn't fly an aeroplane. We were definitely second-class citizens. Now, all that has gone, and good riddance to it. But one is left with cultural issues that are, to be honest, more difficult to deal with. I was battling against legal obstacles, and I could see when I'd smashed one down. Whereas on the cultural issues, it's so difficult to measure progress. There is progress. I'm sure year on year I see progress, but there's still a long way to go.
I completely agree. I think definitely see progress, but certainly a long way to go. I think we hear a lot, everything from Sheryl Sandberg through to where we've seen a variety of different books around women in technology on imposter syndrome. And that's a conversation that keeps coming up. And I think many women in technology specifically really struggle with that feeling they don't belong. How can companies help women overcome those feelings?
Well, as always, I think it's a question of leadership, Lauren. Leaders really should openly share their experiences of self-doubt and how they overcame them. So their vulnerability sets a positive example and helps everyone. I don't think I've ever had problems with things. I mean, I knew I was professional. I always made sure that I did my best work, that I put enough preparation time into things, and that I didn't feel wrong-footed because I knew that I'd done the very best that I could, and you can't do more than that. So leading by example and sharing vulnerability is the only solution that I have in mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think for me, having, really vulnerable and open mentors and coaches has been so crucial to my own journey. And I know for a lot of women as well, when they hear those stories like that, they resonate with them and see opportunity. I think when we think about inspiring young women into technology, it's something I'm really passionate about, and I know you are too. What advice would you give young women to encourage them to pursue a career in technology?
Well, let's celebrate some achievements we have got. The IT sector is the most wonderful area to be working in. It's well paid, it's fascinating, it's challenging, you're doing projects that really make a difference. I cannot imagine a more rewarding career.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've found great joy from being in technology, even on the days where it might
Oh,
not
this is
be
it.
easy.
This is it. It's joy. It's a joyous place to be. We are lucky.
Exactly. I know the creativity and innovation, I think it's, I'm obviously biased because I've been in tech my whole career, as you have, but I think I'm rightly biased because it is so fun. Um, Obviously, we touched a little bit on mentorship and leadership and coaching and things like that. But I'd love to hear from your perspective how important a mentorship and networking for women in technology, and what can we do to make these opportunities better?
I think the good thing about mentorship is that it helps both the mentor and the person being mentored. Um, both gain equally. As to networking, I think women network quite well among ourselves, though often it is at a domestic level, and we slip away from the professional discussions. But women need to learn how to network with men, not feel shy, not congregate as a group of women in a mixed audience. There's some opportunities there that women have to grasp and enjoy.
Yeah, I was in a networking event the other day, surrounded by a lot of women, and someone paused and said, "Does it feel maybe like we might be in a bit of an echo chamber?" Because it was just all of us talking about the challenges of being women in tech, but actually not sharing it with any of the men around us or using it as an opportunity to build us up. So, yeah, even on the best of times, I think I might be a little guilty of that. I think I'm curious to understand. So we've talked a little bit about challenges, opportunities, the joy of being in tech, but actually what changes do you think we need to make to the workplace to make sure women can succeed without having to work harder just to be heard?
I mean, I don't have any new solution. The ones that I've heard about and know customers and clients that are using is to anonymize applications, both for employment and applications for promotion. And that makes a real difference because apparently a female name on the top of a bio data doesn't augur well for acceptance. So anonymize the applications procedure.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think we've found real benefit in that, though. Always the risk of AI. I was talking to someone the other day about anonymizing, and they'd layered AI on top, and it had made it a little bit questionable. So, I'd love to turn now to your personal insights. So, what's the most powerful lesson you've learned in your journey from a young woman entering the tech industry to becoming now what is such a pioneering leader? And how can today's women use that lesson to break through their own barriers?
Well, I'd like to compare experiences with you, really, Lauren. I find, and particularly looking back in my memoir, that I've always presented myself at an aspirational level, and I've presented my company at an aspirational level. So that, for example, we followed the stock exchange blue book, as it's called, the regulations, before we were actually quoted on the stock exchange. So we were indicating where we wanted to go rather than where we thought we were. And really, it's a question of taking every single opportunity. When opportunities come, they often at inconvenient times. When I was asked to lead the British Computer Society, it came at a time when really it was pretty inconvenient. I had to take on special staff to help me through it. But there's no question of saying, no, I'll do it another year. You grab the opportunity as it is and make something of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting, actually. I had that advice quite early in my journey about just taking every opportunity. And I got so hung up about whether I was picking the right thing. And I think a lot of women do. They sit there and think, what if I've made the wrong decision? What if actually I should have taken or waited and taken the different thing? And I think that's quite a challenging piece to overcome as well.
And did you ever find that you regretted opportunities that you'd grasped?
No, but I always regretted not taking them. And so
that's right.
I would always sit back and think, oh, I actually, and it is, it's, you know, it's an imposter syndrome, it's all of the doubt and things like that. But I think it's the moment.
But you've achieved so much, you shouldn't be
Yeah.
suffering from imposter syndrome.
I know. I think it's I think what's interesting, I wrote it down in my notes actually when you were speaking, is I think imposter syndrome for me has got worse over the course of my career. So I remember
Really?
starting and feeling, you know, I could do anything in the world. There was no, of course I was going to start a business, even though I couldn't code. Like, why would I not build a technology business? And now I think I'm quite a lot more risk averse by comparison. And I think that's quite directly tied.
Because you're more experienced and you know what the risks are.
Yes. And therefore I'm also more acutely aware of how experienced everyone else is around me. And I think that is the factor that causes a lot of my imposter syndrome that I never had before, but really similar to other people I see who've become successful at younger ages, where they have those moments to say, oh, God, actually, you know, I didn't realize I knew nothing when I was 22. And actually, now I'm like, oh, I know some things, but I definitely don't. It's the awkward middle ground, I think, for me, that is a challenge.
Well, that's what makes business so interesting, is that there are various phases that are awkward, and then you have a period where things are going along swimmingly, and you think, well, I can do this. And then something else pops up and hits you in the back of the head. I find business absolutely fascinating. I miss the day-to-day, but I was very glad not to be running a business through the lockdown.
Well, I was curious to know from a, you know, risk aversion perspective, quite a lot of women are slightly more risk averse statistically, but obviously business and starting businesses requires you to have a level of risk. How do you drive through that?
Well, starting a business, I always think is less risky than is generally thought, because you can start a business working evenings and weekends just to sort of see whether the model fits and whether you enjoy it. You don't have to give up your day job when you start a business, at least for a few months. Risk gives the opportunity to succeed, but also the chances of failure. But failure is not fatal. You have failures and you just have to recover from them. What people remember from entrepreneurs, for example, is really our successes. She did this, she did that. But what really distinguishes you and me is our ability to cope with failure. If we can run a business, we have to cope with failure. And that is something that's hard learned, but a lesson well learned.
Yes, I did a I remember doing a talk about 3 years ago on all of the failures I'd done. A catastrophic first business that was absolutely dreadful, and in hindsight it was just terrible. My second business was much better, but actually it was the forming and failure of the first business that made the second so successful. So it was so valuable to have. I'd love to know, so we have and titles and titles are things in addition to your job title that make you you. So mine is Chief of Marketing and Armchair Detective, because I love true crime. I'm wondering if you had an and title, what would it be?
Entrepreneur and philanthropist.
That's a pretty good two on that. I think final question for me, though I frankly could ask you questions forever personally, but for the interview purposes, what's one critical change that you think that companies need to implement to significantly increase female leadership and make a really inclusive workplace?
Well, so many companies are trying this, but the route that seems to have the best chance of success is to start at the top and insist that the board or trustees, if you're talking about a not-for-profit, is equally divided among the genders. And if you get it right at the top level, it will filter down very, very quickly. Whereas bottom up doesn't seem to work. It takes ages between a woman leading an IT team at a technical level to moving up to the C-suite. So I would say top down.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's where I've seen the most change is when I've been able to come in at the top, and there's other women around me that have also managed to do the same. And I feel like that's been able to make the most difference, definitely.
Yes.
Anything else I should have asked you that I haven't, that you think I should include?
Well, I'd like a mention of my book,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is a memoir, and it's not really classed as a business book, but about 2/3 of it is about business.
Okay.
And I speak very openly and honestly about the mistakes I made, the good ideas that I didn't have, and so on. So I think it's worth suggesting that young people read it as a story of a real story of what can happen in business, good and bad. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So it's mainly good.
Good. And so in your memoir, is there one particular mistake that stands out as then crafting something in the future, or is it a collection of all those pieces together that made the journey?
There are just so many, but I mean, the biggest mistake I made was an absolute classic one, and everyone told me not to make it. And that was to replicate the success that we'd had in this country and try to replicate it in Scandinavia, tried to replicate it in Benelux, tried to replicate it in the States, all failed at different levels. I mean, we just sold them after a few years. But going international was India, where eventually about half the company was based in India, because that gave access to a skilled workforce in short supply, and that really made a difference to taking us international.
Really, really grateful for your time. And personally, this has been very fascinating as well, to have this conversation with you. So I'm sure you know this already, but you're an inspiration for many. And I text my mum this morning to say, you'll never guess who I'm interviewing, in excitement. So yes, wonderful to have you, and really thank you so much.
My pleasure.